Hi, I'm Mike, and if you're already subscribed or familiar with my channel, you know what I do. If you're new to the channel, it's called Build it or Buy It, where I put together and fabricate different items, sometimes out of steel, sometimes out of wood, and evaluate whether or not the cost to build it and customize it was a better route to go than to buy it. So the current project I'm working on is a set of cornhole boards, and this is episode 2. So again, for those that have been following along, you know that I'm working on the support pieces for underneath the tabletop. So I'm going to continue with that. If you are new, by all means, go back and catch up on past episodes and you'll see what we're building. So as I mentioned in the last episode, I did get the rough pieces cut out. Nothing special there, 1.5 inches by about 22, almost 23 inches long. And so now I'm going to do the setup, and so I can cut the tenons on the end to fit into those mortises that I cut in the long, the side frames. So if I wouldn't have had to cut these pieces ahead of time, I would have still had the dado stack on, and that would have made it a little bit easier to cut those. That's just one way to do it. I keep watching Marketplace and other places to buy a tenoning jig, and one of these days I'll run across one because it is a little bit also another way to cut these, or cut a tenon, especially if they're larger. These are so small that I'm just going to use the table saw with a normal blade, and I'll just take off little bites to build the shoulder, because the shoulder's not very deep anyway. So I'll get set up here and bring it back and show you how I'm going to accomplish that. Okay, I'll pan you down here so you can see what I got going on. Basically, again, because these are such a short tenon, I'm just going to nibble away at it. If you had a tenon cutting jig, you would use the setup just like this and run it through, and that would create what's called the shoulder cut. So that's down here, the depth equals what the width of the tenon is. Then, if it was a much longer tenon, you stand the board on end, you have a jig that clamps this, because as you can imagine, trying to balance this is pretty tricky. So you would clamp this in that. It's a heavy cast iron jig that runs in the miter slot, has some clamps and several adjustments on it so you can change the depth of those things, and then you would run it through again to create what's called the cheek cut. But because my tenons are only long enough, deep enough to go into here, it's pretty easy just to nibble away at them on the saw. So I'm gonna I use a stop block because, again, you don't want to use the miter gauge in combination with the fence, because it could rock and try to catch and kick back. So I just push my piece up against the stop block, and then as soon as I come forward, it's clear the stop block. So and that will make the cheek cut on the two sides. I don't need a cheek cut for the top because of this rabbit. It's okay if it sticks up all the way. So, and then on the bottom, I'll worry about that cheek cut because it needs to be a little bit deeper. I'll sneak up on that, so when these slide down in there, they're perfectly flush with the bottom of the rabbit. So right now, all I'm concentrating on doing is making the depth correct, so that then the resulting tenon width will be the right amount to just snugly slide into those mortises. So I'm going to go ahead and get these two cheek cuts cut on this first one, and then I'll scoot the board out a little bit this direction. I'm exaggerating. I'll scoot the board out, make another cut, scoot it out, make another cut until it's cleaned up all the way along here. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Okay, you can see there that that's basically what I've created now is a little recess or a tenon with only cheek cuts on the sides. I'll come around here. And they won't quite start. See how I can get you in here a little closer. So they're just, it almost kind of wants to start, but not quite. So I will, that means I raise the saw blade just a tick. And repeat the process. That one's in there. It's maybe just a tick looser than I'd like. So I will go back down about half of that with the blade and cut the other end. Oh, the one thing I didn't check was the shoulder depth. So the amount that the board comes in this way, you want this cheek to come in contact with this surface about the same time the tenon touches the bottom. And it's really, really close to touching. It could be a little bit deeper. So to make that deeper, you just scoot the fence away just a tiny little bit. And that will cut a slightly longer tenon. There we go. I like that fit. Shoulder depth looks good. Maybe just, or the cheek depth I would be was just maybe just another hair. You definitely don't want the tenons long, and you don't want them to touch the bottom of the mortise first, because then no matter how hard you clamp it, you'll end up with a gap there. All right, so that fits nice. As you can see, it's sticking up here. So now here's where I kind of dial in the bottom cheek, the depth of the shoulder. No, the shoulder's already set. The depth of the cheek to where these will come down and be perfectly flush with the top, and then I'll also have to knock off these corners, because since I made the mortises with a router bit, they have radiuses in the bottom, so I'll get that set pretty close, and then it's easier just to use a razor knife or a chisel. So to get close on that depth, since it's not a square bottomed hole, for now at least, I can just reach into the bottom of the hole with the dial calipers as compared to this top ledge. Like that. Measure from this surface down to the bottom of the hole. And that'll give me the dimension from the very bottom. And then that's what I can set my finch to. I misspoke there. The fence is already set. That's what sets the shoulder depth. The cheek depth is what I'm working with, so that's actually a change of the saw blade depth. But before I do that, I'm gonna cut since I need to change the saw blade, I'm gonna cut all the shoulders on the long surfaces on the other 3 pieces, and then I'll come back and worry about that second one. So I'll bring you back once I've got that done. Okay, so I increased the depth of the saw blade, and so now that gives me this cut here. These are the 2 that we already did. So this cut, as you can see, is a little bit deeper. And then I took a very fine tooth pole saw, might be hard to see, and cut through just on the corner, so that way, when I shave these off, to make that radius, they'll pop free really easily. So see if I can scooch in here and kind of get a real close up of that without my hands being in the way. So I just put the chisel on there. Try to hold it here awkwardly. This is definitely harder to do by keeping my fingers out of it. And then I just give it a slight little tap, and then it breaks that little corner off and gives you a little bit of a radius. And you just kind of fine tune it with the chisel until it matches that radius. And then I'll do a test fit. That matches the curve of that, so unclamp this because without the other end done, I won't get it to sit all the way to the bottom. And it's just sticking up just a hair. So that means I need to set my blade depth just a little bit more. So I'll do the other end. There we go. So I'll run all these through, and then I'll run them all through first, and then I'll worry about cutting or trimming the radius on the end. Okay, that one fits down in there just perfect. So you probably don't need to see me do that several times. So I'll get these corners rounded off, and then we'll bring you back, and the next thing we'll do will be cutting the handholds. I think I'm going to do that with cut out a template and rough out the hole, probably with the jigsaw, and then use the pattern cutting bit and the router to make a nice clean finish. Okay, so I got all those corners on the tenons rounded off. So let me pan you down here. I just got it kind of clamped together as a dry fit, and that's how it plays out. So as you can see, that now we'll let the top come in and sit down flat on this shoulder and on top of this support cross member. So normally, if that was going to be if the cross member was going to be a structural member, kind of to where there was heavy loads on it, you're typically going to want a much longer shoulder than that for glue surface. But basically, these are the only forces these are going to see is straight down, and because they're bottomed down in the bottom of the mortise, they can't go anywhere, so they don't need a big wide shoulder. So I got to go back in and consult the drawings to figure out where exactly the handholds go, and if I can, I'm going to cheat that. The cross member might be in the way, but if I can, I'm going to cheat it towards the end that has the fold down legs, because of course that end will be heavier, and so when you're carrying them, it'll be nice if they're somewhat balanced. So I'm going to cheat that down as far as I can, and then I do also have to notch, take a 45, this piece here on this far side that you can't see. I've got to cut a 45 on that, because when the legs do fold up, they have a radius corner, and so I was able to cheat that cross member absolutely as far as I could, but it does require me to knock the corner off, so when it folds up, it clears the radius of the leg. So you'll understand when I get the whole thing put together. I'll show you how that fits. So I'm going to go check those measurements, and I will come back, and then we will start laying out and cutting the handholds. Okay, so I changed my mind. As I mentioned, I was going to lay out and cut out the handholds that you would use to carry the cornhole boards, but I changed my mind for two reasons. One, trying to get that hole in a position where the balance would be nice would be a little tricky. I would almost have to assemble them and then cut the hole afterwards. So that would make cutting the hole a little bit trickier as a completed assembly. Plus just the shape of the hole and the thickness of the wood wouldn't be very ergonomic or probably very comfortable. So I decided to do an external handle. So I've just got these, they just attach, they're kind of on a nylon strap, but then they've got a rigid plastic center in them, so they fit your hand nice. So they'll make a much more ergonomic, I guess, handle. And the advantage, since they just bolt in from the outside, is I can attach those after the whole boards are built to get a nice balance point. So I'm just confirming that, and so now then the next thing I'm going to do, that was the only reason why I wasn't gluing these up, is would have been easier to cut those handholds while it was apart, but there's really nothing keeping me from gluing it up, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Some of you might see what I'm going to do and like, what are you doing? But trust me, it's going to be okay. When I glue up pieces, sometimes depending on their size, I'll do it several different ways. Sometimes on sawhorses if they're bigger, sometimes on the woodworking bench, but it's not real wide. So in this case, I'm going to use the table saw for a couple of reasons. One, it's big enough. Secondly, the big cast iron table is really flat. But obviously I don't want to have the moisture of the glue or any glue dripping on the table, so I'll pan you down here. I've just got it covered with, I actually use freezer paper because it has wax on one side, so even if there is glue that drips, if it was just normal paper, like construction paper or something, that moisture would still go through the paper and potentially could start to rust the tabletop. So this has wax on one side, which keeps the glue from going anywhere. So I get going on that. If you recall, I talked about when I machined the box joint, I made the pins just a little bit proud, and that way you could sand them perfectly flat. So when you go to clamp that, that can present a challenge, because when you're trying to clamp this end piece tight, the clamp hits on the tops of the pins and you'd never clamp it tight. So all I did is I just made a couple of these real quick clamping calls. They're just relieved. So these high spots line up with this board. So when I'm clamping it, I'm pushing on this board, not on the pins. So that way I can still get a nice tight clamp. There's just 4 of them. I use them on both sides. When I glue stuff up, if I can, it takes a little bit longer, but I prefer to try to limit the number of joints that I have to glue at any one time, just because then you're having to work a little bit faster. You have to have a lot more elaborate clamp setup. So in the case of this, because they're box joints and they can be slid together from the end like a dovetail would be, or even a dado or a rabbit, I'm just going to, you can see here, I'm just going to do this end. That end doesn't even have the piece on it yet. So I will glue this one up, make sure it's square. The spreaders or these stretchers, those help keep it parallel. They're just sitting in there, they're not glued in. So I'll get this end clamped, and then after it's set, then I'll go ahead and do the other end. One other advantage of using the table saw is you can actually utilize the fence. So I've got the far end of both pressed up against the fence, and then I'll reach around and the clamp will go on the far side of the fence. So in essence, the fence becomes a caul, and it also gives you a nice broad, straight, flat surface for those other pieces to push against. So anyway, I'll set you back here so you can watch, and I will get going on getting some glue brushed onto these. I will tape the insides, so if there is any squeeze out, that'll make that clean up a little bit easier. And then I'll just use a wet rag to try to clean up the glue, any squeeze out on the outside. I did, because it's easier to do with it disassembled, I did go ahead and sand all of the inside surfaces with a 320 grit. So those are sanded and ready to go. The outside, of course, will be easy to sand even when it's assembled. So let's get going. Due to the angle of the 2 long bar clamps, it's pulling the whole frame in basically a trapezoid type shape. So I'm going to use another bar clamp here to pull it back to square, so that when the glue sets up, it'll hold it in that square position. Okay, so that didn't go quite as smooth as I planned. Those, next time I do the box joints, I'll probably make a little bit more clearance in them. They slid together fine, but when you get glue in there, and of course that almost instantly starts to swell the wood a little bit. So I really had to bear down on it. As you see in there, I had to use the rubber mallet at one point to get the box joint to seat. But at any rate, I got them pulled in tight. That last clamp I put it on was just to pull it around into square. So I'll give this a few hours just to set up, and then I'll come back out, and I would cut the legs now, but given I'm working on the table saw, that prevents me from using it. So I'm going to give those a couple hours to set up, and then I'll come back and do the other end, and then the stretchers, those can be slid down in at a later date. Again, instead of trying to fight multiple joints, it's easier to do them, take small bites in my opinion. So I'll get the other end done. I can always bow the longitudinals out a little bit, slide those down in there, and then release them and clamp them so that I don't smear glue. So I'll bring you on back here when I'm ready to glue the other end. Okay, so I forgot to turn the camera on, but I got the second end glued up. So I'll get those clamps taken off. It's been long enough, the glue's set on that one. I'll get the clamps taken off, give you a quick look at the whole thing, and then probably won't film the second one because it's a repeat of re-gluing the same joint. So we'll see how it turned out. I'll give you a better look after I get those sanded down. Okay, it's the next morning. I glued that last piece last night, as I mentioned, so both frames are fully glued up and dried. I did a little bit of sanding this morning on the finger joints, so I'll bring you in here a little bit closer so you can see how they turned out. No gaps. Again, I probably should have maybe actually had a little bit more clearance for glue because it was really a tight fit, but that'll just make for that much stronger of a joint. So I think I'm pretty sure I'm close to a full episode here, so I'll finish it up here. Appreciate you guys watching. One thing I thought of I get a fair number of comments and respond to as many as I can. I thought one thing that might be interesting for you guys to do is, as I'm doing build it or buy it projects, for you guys to make a guess as to what you think my final cost is going to be. And then we'll see how close you guys come. So maybe we can try that on this project. You guys can make in the comment section, put in there what you think I'm going to have in total cost into these cornhole boards, and then I'll talk about that when I do the final wrap-up. I'll talk about whom ID was closest. So anyway, in the next episode, what I think I'll do off camera is I have to cut the rest of the pieces out, which is no biggie. That's just a matter of running them through the table saw, ripping them to width, and cutting them to length. So I'll get all the pieces cut, I think, because I'd like to wrap this up in one more episode after this. I'll get all the pieces cut, and then maybe do the final episode will be a dry assembly, and then I'll show a little bit on the finishing. I'm going to use a spar varnish, and then the final application of the skin that goes on top. So anyway, come on back for the last episode. Thanks.